Hi, and thank you so much for popping by. My name is Dr. Rita Pobeluzui, and you are most welcome to this conversation today. Now, on my mind are two terms. One is intra-African diplomacy, and the other one is Pan-Africanism. Now, the reason I'm talking about these two terms is because when you juxtapose them, they explain why they would seem to be a sense of disconnect between the presidents, the policymakers, the leaders, and of course the people on the ground. Intra-African diplomacy is also used in juxtaposition to issues of foreign policy, right? And that is because these are two concepts that are speaking to this idea of engaging and interacting with other nations in a way that you can not only boost the peace and stability, but to also boost some sense of economic development, right? And one of the reasons that I'm juxtaposing the term intra-African diplomacy and, of course, Pan-Africanism is because, on one hand, Pan-Africanism is saying, we have to come together as African countries to mitigate the influence of colonization, right? And in this coming together, that spirit of coming together means that when it comes to intra-African diplomacy, countries are finding it difficult to say to the other nation, oh, excuse me, your political unrest, your social unrest, the way you are governing your country is negatively affecting us. Now, there's a lot of social unrest in Southern Africa as a result of this influx of migration, right? This influx of migrants from other African countries running away from the social and political unrest in their own countries and running away to countries such as South Africa. The people on the ground are the ones who are feeling the brunt, right? Who are feeling this pressure of the influx of migrants, right? And people on the ground are literally fighting each other, literally killing each other because there is this influx and they feel threatened by the other group because they are also trying to survive, right? People are not understanding why it seemingly feels as if the leaders, the policymakers, the decision makers, the politicians are not doing enough to fix the issue on the ground, right? And this is why diplomacy sometimes seems as if it favors those that are in power. Now, if you look at the geopolitical status of Southern Africa, these are countries that are highly dependent on each other. For example, in the case of Botswana, Botswana relies on South Africa when there's a shortage of power or electricity. If Botswana is owing South Africa through Eskom 2.6 billion for their power or electricity supply, it makes it very difficult for Botswana to be trying to be playing big brother on South Africa because, excuse us, you owe us billions, and when we talk about food security, that's a big issue. So in terms of food security, as I mentioned, Botswana's import bill in the month of April 2025 was over 6 million. And majority of the foods and beverages that are imported into Botswana are actually coming from countries such as South Africa, predominantly. And then to a lesser degree, we are also importing foods and beverages from countries such as Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Namibia, Eswatini, and Zambia. And this is within the African region context, right? If you look outside, Botswana has a huge import bill as well in connection to Brazil and Japan. So a lot of food and beverages are also imported from these two countries. But overall, the largest trading partner for Africa at the moment is the European Union. So you can see why there is a lot of dependency by African countries on external actors, right? And I'm not even talking about diamonds, right? We know that the African region is not absorbing the diamonds or the gold or the minerals that Africa is producing, that these actually are being exported out. One leader in the Southern African region who really broke the mold and broke the trend of intra-African diplomacy was the former president of Botswana, Lieutenant General Ian Khama. He was one of the few leaders in the Southern African region who said, you know what, Zimbabwe, the political instability in your country, the social unrest in that country are causing people, Zimbabweans, to migrate to our country, e.g. Botswana, to migrate to other Southern African countries. And this is causing more pressure for our economies as well, which are not necessarily doing great, right? In conclusion, what this article is actually saying is that, although Africa's diplomacy has evolved over the years, the basic aspects of the challenges in African diplomacy remain evident. This is illustrated by a wide range of factors, such as the effects of colonization and foreign influence, iniquity of conflicts that drain African diplomatic resources, and the continent's limited influence in the international system, which emanates from its reliance on the international system. With these factors combined, this demonstrates how Africa has, to a certain extent, been debilitated in its ability to negotiate with both domestic and international actors with limited to non-diplomatic weight. So this article is basically saying that Africa has very limited diplomatic weight because of its reliance on these external factors or these external actors, right? And for as long as Africa needs the West or China, as President Boko was saying at the World Economic Trade Forum, then it becomes very difficult for the G7 to take notice of Africa. And it makes it difficult for African countries to have a strong sense of presence in the international arena. And the article says, however, that in spite of the factors that have handicapped the African continent, the continent should strive to further strengthen intercontinental diplomacy more as a first step through the emphasis of Pan-Africanism. The establishment of this core foundation of diplomacy is vital as a stepping stone to then further strengthening the continent's diplomacy with external actors. On the other hand, the African region should untangle itself from the shackles of colonialism and utilize its intra-regional arrangements more to boost its economic development prospects, which will increase its weight on the global platform. With this being said, Africa is making headway in its diplomatic practice efforts. However, there is room for more to be done. So as I was reading that statement, specifically the part where it says the emphasis of Pan-Africanism, the person who comes to mind is the former president of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, who was really pushing for this idea of Pan-Africanism. Now, it would seem here that Pan-Africanism, if that could work as a concept, it would help Africa to increase its strength, its bargaining power, its presence in the international stage, right? And then once that inner strength is gained, that is when they can now start to project outwards to the external actors, those that are outside of Africa, right? On one hand, there's so much competition for the external actors, right? There's so much competition to get attention from countries in the West and the East in order to sell all of these minerals, in order to engage in trade. So because of that competition, you can see how it can be difficult to have this sense of Pan-Africanism as well. But as this research is showing, if Pan-Africanism were to work, then it would also help to strengthen Africa's presence in the international forums or to strengthen Africa's presence internationally. When we talk about the G7, that is where you realize who are the powerful nations in the world and why African nations are not in the G7, right? And as I've said in this channel before, when you go to platforms such as the UN, you can feel the tension. You can feel this tension between those countries that have and the countries that are there to beg for more aid. So this lack of assertiveness to caution other leaders when things are going wrong in their countries is as a result of these interconnected issues, such as competing for international markets, competing for the attention of international actors. And this is why it would seem that there are so many social and invisible forces that are keeping African leaders from cautioning one another. And this is not to say African diplomacy, intra-African diplomacy has not been successful in other areas. Of course it has been, but the issue that needs to be fixed are the failures of intra-African diplomacy, right? Yeah, so I'm just trying to have these conversations to show you why sometimes it would feel like there's a disconnect between presidents and leaders and the people on the ground when it comes to these geopolitical tensions, these social unrests and the political unrests in other countries that are creating the pressure and influx and migration to other and neighboring countries in regions such as Southern Africa and the African region at large. Alrighty, my friend, I thank you so much for popping by. I hope you are having a lovely day where you are, but most importantly, I hope you're having a healthy day wherever you're watching me from. Bye.